Snow fell thick across the ridgeline, blanketing the barbed wire fence that had been erected just 3 weeks prior around the remote property. Christmas Eve. No lights. No church bells. Only wind howling through pine trees and fresh tracks pressed into new snow. They thought this was just wilderness, a woman living alone, buying a mountain to escape the world. They didn't know the landowner was a former SEAL sniper who had survived places where others never returned. By morning, the snow remained white. But those who crossed the fence never came back. Natalie Kern signed the deed on a Tuesday in October 3 months before that Christmas. The property covered 800 acres of dense forest, climbing from valley floor to a granite peak that broke through the tree line at 9,000 feet. No roads, no power lines, no neighbors within 12 miles. The realtor had been enthusiastic at first. Its pristine wilderness, perfect for a retreat center or ecotourism. Natalie had stood in the clearing where a hunting cabin sagged against 40 years of weather, looking at sight lines and wind patterns. "I'll take it. Don't you want to see the rest of the property?" "I've seen enough." The realtor's enthusiasm dimmed when Natalie paid in full cash wire transfer and requested the sale be kept off public record where possible. "Are you running from something?" Natalie had smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Running towards something. Privacy. In town, speculation began immediately. The locals at Riverside Diner traded theories over coffee. Rich divorcee hiding from her ex. Witness protection has to be. Probably one of those survivalist types. Martha Hendricks, who'd lived in these mountains for 60 years, had a different take. Woman like that doesn't run from anything. She's the thing people run from. But Martha kept that observation to herself. Natalie spent November reinforcing the cabin. New roof. Wood stove. Insulation. She worked alone, driving the 40-minute dirt road to town only for supplies. She was 34, lean and weather-worn, with cropped dark hair and eyes that tracked movement before thought caught up. When she spoke, which was rarely, her voice carried the flat affect of someone who'd learned to communicate in radio brevity codes. She installed the fence in early December. 8-foot chain link, topped with angled barbed wire motion sensors at quarter-mile intervals, trail cameras on trees. The fence didn't encircle the entire property. That would have been impossible and unnecessary. Instead, it protected the valley approach and the 2 game trails that led up from the neighboring national forest. To anyone watching, it looked like the paranoia of a woman who wanted to be left alone. To Natalie, it was a defensive perimeter. She finished the fence on December 20th. That evening, she hung a single decoration inside the cabin, a small wooden star hand carved that she propped against the window facing east. It caught the sunset, glowing amber, through the glass. She sat in the wooden chair she'd built, rifle disassembled on the table, and watched the last light fade from the valley below. The silence here was different from any she'd known. Not the held-breath silence of a hide site. Not the after-action silence of missions completed. This was older, indifferent. The mountain didn't care about her SEAL trident, or her discharge papers, or the nightmares that still jolted her awake at 300. It was the first time in 6 years she'd felt the possibility of peace. She should have known it wouldn't last. The mission brief had been clear: insertion at midnight, 4 clicks through mountainous terrain, eliminate high-value target before dawn, extraction. It was supposed to be routine, the kind of operation her SAAL team had executed dozens of times. That was 7 years ago. Another December. Another mountain range 9 time zones away. Natalie had been primary sniper call sign Echo 3. Her spotter was Danny Patterson, a kid from Tennessee, who could read wind like some people read books. Their team leader was Commander Wade Brennan, career Navy, 3 tours under his belt. They'd moved through snow-covered forest in complete darkness, nods turning the world green and grainy. Natalie remembered the cold burning her lungs, the weight of her rifle, the way Danny's breath formed small clouds in the infrared. They'd reached the hide site at 200, settling into position with the kind of patience that separates professionals from amateurs. The compound below held 12 hostiles, including the target, a warlord financing attacks against you. S. Forces. Simple math. Wait for dawn. One shot. Exfil. But the intel was wrong. The warlord had his own sniper, someone who knew those mountains better than any satellite imagery could show. Someone who'd set tripwires across the most obvious approach routes. Someone patient enough to wait for operators who thought they were hunters. Danny died first. Head shot instant. He'd leaned forward to adjust his scope and simply stopped existing. Natalie had frozen training, warring with shock, searching for muzzle flash, finding nothing. Suppressor Brennan's voice in her ear barely whisper. 2 o'clock high. Return fire. But she couldn't acquire the target. The hostile sniper was using the terrain, firing from positions that offered no clear shot. The rest of the SAAL team tried to maneuver, but they were in a kill box. Every movement drew fire. Every attempt to retreat triggered mines the satellite imaging had missed. They lost 2 more operators before they finally pinned down the sniper's position. Natalie had taken the shot 1,000 yards through mountain wind, compensating for altitude and adrenaline shake. She'd seen the figure fall through her scope, but it was too late. 3 dead. Mission failed. Extraction under fire. The after-action report noted intelligence failure and insufficient reconnaissance. Commander Brennan received a letter of reprimand for the tactical decisions. Natalie received orders to report for psych evaluation standard procedure after casualties. She never returned to active duty. The Navy offered her options desk assignment, training, command, medical discharge with benefits. She chose the discharge. Couldn't explain why not in words that made sense to superior officers who talked about valuable experience and career trajectory. How could she explain that she'd stopped trusting the chain of command, that every mission brief now felt like potential betrayal, that the only thing that made sense anymore was complete control over her own perimeter, her own decisions, her own survival? She'd left the service without ceremony. No retirement plaque, no final formation. Just paperwork and a checkout medical exam where she lied to every screening question. She'd spent 4 years drifting. Security contracting jobs that paid well but felt hollow. Shooting competitions she won without satisfaction. Relationships that ended when people asked too many questions about her past or noticed she slept with her back to the wall and never fully relaxed even during moments of supposed intimacy. The mountain property had been listed online for 2 years, price dropping every quarter. 800 acres that nobody wanted, too remote for development, too rugged for farming, too far from ski resorts for tourism value. When Natalie saw the listing, something in her chest unclenched for the first time since that December night 7 years ago. A place where she could see anyone coming, where she made the rules, where nobody gave her orders that might be based on bad intelligence and wishful thinking. She'd bought it within a week. The cabin became her new hide site. The mountain, her area of operations. And for 3 beautiful months she'd believed she was done with warfare. That she could hang a wooden star in the window and watch snow fall and let the past finally be past. She should have remembered what Danny used to say usually while cleaning his rifle at the end of a long day. Sugar geography don't make you safe. Mindset does. And mindset takes practice. She'd forgotten to practice. The motion sensor alert came at 2,147 hours on December 24th. Natalie was brewing coffee on the wood stove, listening to the wind when her phone buzzed with the silent alarm notification. Southeast perimeter. Trail camera 3. She pulled up the camera feed on the tablet. 5 figures moving through the tree line, spread out in tactical formation. They carried rifles, wore winter camouflage, and moved with the confidence of people who'd done this before. Not hikers. Not lost hunters. Poachers. Natalie recognized the type immediately. These weren't opportunists, hoping to bag a deer out of season. This was organized professional wildlife trafficking. The kind of operation that killed endangered species for black market organs and exotic meat, that left carcasses to rot, that shot anyone who interfered. She watched them test the fence, probing for weak points. The leader, tall, heavy build, maybe 40, signaled the others to spread out. They were scouting tonight, planning to return with vehicles and equipment. Natalie didn't move. didn't reach for her rifle. Not yet. Instead, she watched, noted their patterns, counted weapons, 3 AR platform rifles, 2 bolt actions, all with quality optics. Observed how they communicated hand signals, disciplined spacing. These men had military or paramilitary training. Probably former contractors, same as half the poaching operations that worked public lands, exploiting their tactical knowledge for profit instead of protection. The leader pulled out a satellite phone, spoke briefly. Natalie couldn't hear the words, but she read his body language. He was reporting back to someone, confirming the route was viable. They thought the fence was meant to keep out bears or prevent cattle from wandering. They didn't see it as a defensive perimeter. Didn't understand that every sensor, every camera, every angle of coverage had been positioned by someone who understood exactly how to monitor and control terrain. After 30 minutes, they withdrew, melted back into the forest, leaving only boot prints in the snow. Natalie sat in the darkness, coffee growing cold in her hand. Her first instinct was tactical assessment, 5 hostiles, likely part of a larger group, probable return within 24 to 72 hours. Her second instinct was simpler, more primal. They had crossed her fence. She forced herself to think through the civilian options. She could call the sheriff's department, report trespassing, let law enforcement handle it. But she knew how that conversation would go. She'd be the paranoid new landowner seeing threats in shadows. The sheriff might send a deputy to file a report, tell her to call again if she saw actual poaching. Meanwhile, the operation would lie low for a few weeks, then return. The mountains were vast. Law enforcement was stretched thin, and these men killed for profit. Natalie cleaned her coffee cup, then walked to the locked cabinet, where she kept her rifles. She opened it, looked at the precision instrument she'd carried through a dozen countries, the tool that had saved her life and ended others. For the first time in 3 months, she began planning an operation. Christmas morning, Natalie drove to town. The Forest Service ranger station was closed for the holidays, so she went directly to the county sheriff's office. A young deputy named Tyler Chen was manning the desk, looking miserable about working Christmas Day. "Can I help you? I need to report trespassing and suspected poaching activity on my property." Natalie slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots from her trail cameras, timestamps visible, 5 armed men clearly documented. Chen looked through the photos with growing disinterest. These guys could just be hunters who got turned around. Happens all the time up in those mountains. On private property, behind a marked fence, carrying weapons consistent with commercial poaching operations. "You one of those types who knows a lot about weapons?" Chen's tone shifted, becoming carefully neutral. Natalie recognized the shift. She was being recategorized from concerned citizen to potential problem. "I'm a landowner reporting illegal activity. Are you going to investigate?" "I'll file a report. If you see them again, call dispatch immediately. Don't confront them yourself. And how long will it take for a unit to respond?" 40 minutes an hour. Chen's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we do our best, but it's a big county. Meanwhile, maybe consider that a fence doesn't give you the right to threaten people. These mountains don't belong to anybody. Not really." Natalie stood, taking back the folder. "The deed says otherwise." She stopped at Riverside Diner on her way out of town. It was crowded with families celebrating Christmas breakfast, warm with the smell of coffee and bacon. Martha Hendricks sat in her usual corner booth, working through a plate of eggs. "Mind if I join you?" Natalie asked. Martha looked surprised, but gestured to the empty seat. "Thought you avoided people." "Usually, but I need local knowledge." "About what?" "Poaching. Organized poaching. The kind that operates in these mountains." Martha's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. "You're asking if I know about the Kincaid Group." "Is that what they're called?" "Not officially. No organization name, no headquarters. Just everyone knows. They work the national forest, sometimes cross onto private land. Been doing it for 5-6 years. Take elk, bear, mountain lion. Sell to markets overseas. Dangerous people. Has anyone reported them?" "Sure. Multiple times. Sheriff investigated twice. Never found enough evidence. Witnesses recanted. Kincaid himself is careful, never gets his hands dirty personally. Uses contractors who disappear when heat comes. The sheriff's department can't handle them. Martha studied Natalie with the directness of someone too old to waste time on politeness. You planning to do something stupid? I'm planning to defend my property. There's defending, and then there's starting a war. Which one you aiming for? Natalie didn't answer. She left cash on the table and walked out into the cold Christmas morning. When she returned to the cabin, she found tracks in the snow near her eastern fence line. Fresh. Made within the last hour while she'd been in town. Someone had left a gutted deer carcass hanging from her gate. The animal's organs were missing, taken for black market sale. Its head had been removed. Blood stained the snow beneath it, still steaming slightly in the freezing air. It was a message. An answer to her fence, her cameras, her presence. We go where we want. Your property rights mean nothing. Natalie cut down the carcass and buried it in the forest. Then she returned to the cabin and began converting her home into what it really was, a forward operating base. She started with terrain analysis. Natalie spread topographic maps across the cabin floor, marking elevation changes, sightlines, approach routes. The property's natural features became tactical assets: the rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley, the narrow ravine that channeled movement, the open meadow that provided clear fields of fire. She'd learned this skill in a different mountain range, preparing for operations where understanding terrain meant the difference between mission success and body bags. The principles hadn't changed, only the mission parameters. Wind patterns. Prevailing westerlies, but the valley created unpredictable eddies at dawn and dusk. She'd need to account for drift at distances over 400 yards. Temperature inversions. Cold air settling in the valley at night, creating thermal layers that affected bullet trajectory. She'd compensated for worse in Afghanistan. Vegetation density. Pine forest provided concealment but limited movement. The hardwoods near the creek were bare now, offering visibility but less cover. Anyone approaching from the southeast would be exposed crossing the meadow. Snow depth. Currently, 8 inches in the valley, deeper at higher elevations. Good for tracking movement, bad for silent approach. The poachers would need to either wade through it loudly or stick to established game trails, which Natalie had already mapped and could monitor. By December 26, she'd positioned additional sensors. Not the commercial motion detectors from her fence. These were military-grade, borrowed from old contacts who knew better than to ask questions. They monitored pressure, thermal signatures, and movement patterns. The data fed to the tablet mounted beside her bed. She established firing positions. Primary hide site on the western ridge, 700 yards from the cabin, with clean sight lines to the southeast approach. Alternate position in the barn foundation behind the cabin, shorter range, but better concealment. Emergency fallback position at the tree line if she needed to evade and observe. Each position was prepared range cards, marked with distance estimates to key landmarks, ammunition, catched-in waterproof containers, camouflage materials positioned. She cut firing lanes through the underbrush, removing branches that might deflect rounds, but leaving enough vegetation to mask the cleared areas. The cabin itself became a defensive strongpoint. She reinforced the doorframe, positioned water and supplies, established a communications plan. Her emergency beacon could reach Forest Service rescue, but only if she activated it. More useful was the satellite messenger that could send encrypted texts to 2 former team members who still owed her favors. She didn't plan to call them. This wasn't their fight. But having backup options was part of staying alive. On December 27th, she reconfigured the Christmas decoration. The wooden star still sat in the east window, but now it served a dual purpose: by day a landmark for range calculations, by night, when backlit, a distraction that would draw the eye while she maneuvered in darkness. The dichotomy didn't escape her attention. A symbol of hope and peace, weaponized. That evening she stood outside the cabin, looking across the valley as twilight drained color from the world. The temperature was dropping fast, moon rising over the eastern ridge. Perfect conditions for night operations, clear sky, good visibility, hard snow that would broadcast any movement. If the poachers came tonight, they'd be operating in her environment, under her conditions, against someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of violent patience. Natalie checked her watch. 1,845 hours. She made coffee dark and bitter and settled into the wooden chair by the window. Her rifle rested against the wall within arm's reach condition, 3 magazine inserted chamber, empty, safety on. She could bring it to condition 1 in under 2 seconds. She didn't expect immediate action. Professional poachers would scout multiple times before committing to a full operation. They'd want to confirm the woman living alone was truly alone, that no husband or boyfriend existed, that local law enforcement wasn't increasing patrols. But she'd learned in combat that expectations were often wrong. The only certainty was uncertainty. So she waited, sipping coffee, watching the moon track across the sky, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anger, but a cold, focused clarity. She knew this feeling, had welcomed it during missions when everything simplified into geometry and physics, when doubt evaporated and only the shot remained. She'd thought she'd left this version of herself behind, thought she could build a life without tactical calculations and threat assessments, thought peace was something she could choose. But peace, she was remembering, wasn't a choice. It was a condition that had to be maintained, and sometimes maintaining it required people willing to defend it against those who saw it as weakness. The motion sensor alert came at 2,312 hours. This time, there were more of them, 12 hostiles. Natalie counted them through the thermal scope, watching heat signatures move through the forest. They approached from 2 directions, main group of 8, from the southeast, flanking team of 4 from the northeast. Coordinated assault plan. They'd learned the terrain, identified the cabin's position, and were executing a surround and overwhelm strategy. They were also loud. Not carelessly loud, they maintained tactical spacing and hand signals, but loud enough that Natalie heard boots crunching snow 3 minutes before visual contact. These men had military training, but they'd gotten comfortable. They'd operated in these mountains for years without serious opposition, and comfort bred overconfidence. Through her scope, she identified the leader from the first scouting party. He directed the assault team, positioning men to cover approaches, signaling 2 to advance on the cabin. They carried not just hunting rifles now, but tactical gear-plate carriers, night vision, automatic weapons. One man hauled a portable spotlight. They thought they were raiding a lone woman's cabin. Anticipated maybe a handgun, maybe a shotgun, maybe screaming and negotiation. The best outcome for them would be terrorizing her into leaving. The worst outcome they'd considered was probably a brief firefight ending with her surrender. They had no idea they were walking into a prepared defensive position manned by someone who'd orchestrated operations against hardened targets. Natalie let them come. Watched them cross the snow-covered meadow, watched them approach the cabin, watched them stack up outside the door in a textbook breach formation. The point man tested the door, reinforced, locked. He stepped back, gestured to the man carrying the spotlight. That's when Natalie took her first shot. Not a kill shot. She put a round through the spotlight, shattering it in a spray of glass and sparks. The crack of the rifle split the night, echoing off the valley walls. The assault team dove for cover, training, overriding surprise. But they were in the open meadow, no good cover available, moon-bright snow making them visible. Their night vision became a liability as the muzzle flash overloaded the optics. Natalie had already moved. She'd fired from the barn foundation position, then immediately shifted to a prepared fallback point 15 yards north. She chambered another round, acquired a new target, the man trying to locate her position with his rifle-mounted light. Second shot. The light exploded. The man dropped his rifle, clutching his hand. More shouting. The assault team scattered, some running for the tree line, some going prone in the snow. Their leader was trying to regain control, screaming orders Natalie couldn't hear but could interpret from body language: suppress the threat, identify shooter position, prepare to assault. But they didn't know where she was. Her muzzle flash had been brief, suppressed by the barn's stone foundation. She wore winter camouflage that matched the snow and shadow. And she'd been trained to shoot and move, never staying in one position long enough to be targeted. The flanking team from the northeast tried to maneuver. Natalie tracked him through her thermal scope, watched them attempt to reach the cabin from the unengaged side. They thought they were being clever, exploiting the confusion. Third shot. Dirt and snow erupted 5 feet in front of the lead flanker, right in his path. He froze, then dove sideways. Fourth shot. The tree trunk beside the second flanker exploded in splinters. They got the message. Every approach was covered. Every move was observed. Whoever was shooting knew exactly where they were and was choosing not to kill them. Yet, the psychological impact was immediate. These were men accustomed to being predators operating against prey that ran or froze. Now they were prey pinned down by a shooter they couldn't locate, couldn't suppress, couldn't flank. Natalie shifted position again, moving to her primary hide site on the western ridge. It took her 3 minutes of careful movement, using the terrain to mask her approach. By the time she settled into position, the assault team had made a critical mistake. They'd clustered together near the tree line, seeking comfort in numbers. She could have ended it then. Clean shots at 200 yards targets, bunched up, minimal wind. She could have cut them down before they understood what was happening. Instead, she acquired the leader, put the crosshairs center mass, then dropped the aim point 6 inches low and right, and squeezed the trigger. The round hit dirt 2 feet from the leader's position, kicking up snow and frozen earth. He jerked away, shouting into his radio. Natalie couldn't hear the transmission, but she could imagine it. "We're taking accurate fire from an elevated position. Shooter has us bracketed. Request immediate extraction." But there was no extraction coming. No backup. No reinforcements. Just 12 men realizing they'd miscalculated badly and were now trapped in a kill zone controlled by someone who could drop any of them at will. The leader made a decision. He began directing the retreat, not a rout, but a controlled withdrawal. Men moving in pairs, covering each other, maintaining defensive positioning as they fell back toward the forest. Natalie let them go. She tracked their movement, occasionally putting a round near enough to keep them moving, but not so close as to wound. She was hurting them, pushing them away from the cabin, away from her property, sending a message that every poacher would understand this territory is defended. The cost of entry is your life. The last man disappeared into the tree line at 2,347 hours. Natalie remained in position scope, scanning for stragglers' ears, tuned for the sound of anyone trying to circle back. Nothing. Just wind through pines and the settling quiet of a Christmas night. She waited 30 more minutes before moving. When she finally descended from the ridge, she approached the cabin, carefully weapon ready. The assault team had left equipment scattered in their retreat, the shattered spotlight, spent shell casings from the few panicked return shots they'd managed, blood in the snow, where the man with the destroyed light had clutched his injured hand. No bodies. No fatalities. Just evidence of a disciplined defensive action against armed trespassers. Natalie collected the shell casings, evidence of their weaponry and intent. She documented the scene with photos, timestamps visible. Then she secured the cabin and sat in her chair, watching the moon set, feeling the familiar tremor in her hands that came after action. Not fear. Not regret. Just adrenaline working its way out of her system. She'd crossed a line tonight. Moved from civilian landowner to active combatant. There would be consequences. Legal questions, maybe. Revenge attempts, possibly. The poaching organization wouldn't accept this defeat without response. But for now, in the quiet pre-dawn of Christmas morning, her property was secure. The fence had held its meaning, and the wooden star in the window still caught the last starlight glowing softly against the darkness. Dawn came late, in the valley sunlight, creeping down the eastern slopes, while the forest floor remained in shadow. Natalie hadn't slept. She'd maintained watch through the night, expecting retaliation, but none came. By 700 hours, she allowed herself to stand down from full alert. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees. Fresh snow had fallen in the early morning hours, covering some of the tracks from the previous night, but not erasing them entirely. Natalie walked the perimeter, documenting everything: approach routes, firing positions. The assault team had attempted to use blood trails. She found where they'd staged their vehicles: a logging road 2 miles northeast outside her property line. Tire tracks indicated 3 trucks, one possibly a 4-wheel drive diesel by the depth and spacing. They'd fled in haste. She found abandoned equipment: a bolt cutter, a section of rope, a tactical knife with the maker's mark filed off. Professional gear. Expensive. These weren't amateurs playing at poaching. This was organized crime with paramilitary infrastructure. Back at the cabin, Natalie's satellite messenger showed 3 unread messages. The first 2 were from her emergency contacts, checking in after the device's motion sensors indicated unusual activity. The third was from an unknown number. She opened it. "We know who you are." 5 words. No threat. No demand. Just a statement of intelligence gathering. Natalie deleted the message. They were trying to intimidate her, banking on the assumption that her past made her vulnerable. They didn't understand that her past was exactly why intimidation wouldn't work. She'd already survived the worst thing that could happen: watching teammates die because of someone else's decisions. Nothing these poachers threatened could match that weight. The morning passed quietly. Natalie cleaned her rifle, logged the ammunition expended, reviewed the night's actions for tactical lessons. She'd fired 7 rounds total. All warning shots, except the 2 targeting equipment. 0 casualties. That had been a choice. In combat, you eliminated threats with maximum efficiency. But this wasn't combat, not officially. These were civilians, even if armed and criminal. Killing them would have triggered investigations she couldn't afford, attracted attention that would compromise her privacy. More importantly, she didn't want to kill them. That realization surprised her. 6 years ago, fresh from the service rage and grief, still raw, she might have welcomed the opportunity. Might have seen it as justice or catharsis, or a dozen other justifications for violence. But time and distance had changed her. She'd learned that killing wasn't cleansing, didn't undo the past, didn't bring back the dead or make the nightmares stop. It was just ending people, with all the moral complexity that entailed. So she'd chosen restraint, used her skills to dominate without destroying, sent a message that was unambiguous but not absolute. The question now, would they understand the message? At 1,430 hours, a sheriff's department cruiser appeared on the access road. Deputy Chen climbed out, hand resting on his duty weapon, looking nervous. A second deputy emerged from the passenger side, older, heavyset, with sergeant's stripes. Natalie met them in the clearing, unarmed hands visible. "Miss," Colonel Chen said, "we received reports of gunfire in this area last night. Multiple shots. Want to tell us about that?" "I had trespassers on my property. Armed trespassers. I fired warning shots to repel them." "Warning shots." The sergeant spoke for the first time, voice flat. "How many?" 7 rounds. "No casualties. I have documentation if you'd like to see it." She showed them her phone photos of the trespassing evidence, timestamp data from her security system, images of the abandoned equipment. The sergeant studied everything carefully. "These men were carrying automatic weapons," he observed. "Yes." "And you just scared them off." "I held a defensive position and made it clear that further advance would result in casualties. They chose to withdraw." Chen looked skeptical. 1 woman against 12 armed men. Terrain advantage. Training advantage. And they weren't prepared for resistance. The sergeant's expression shifted, calculation replacing skepticism. "What kind of training you have, Ems?" "Kern. Military. Small unit tactics. Marksmanship." "How recently?" "I discharged 6 years ago." "Combat experience." Natalie met his gaze. "Yes." The sergeant nodded slowly. "You know the legal definition of self-defense in this state?" "I do. I was on my property. They were armed trespassers with demonstrated hostile intent. I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself and my land." Some people might say 7 rounds isn't minimum force. Some people haven't been in a gunfight. 7 rounds across a 4-minute engagement all aimed at equipment or terrain, 0 injuries. That's extraordinary restraint. The sergeant almost smiled. Yeah, it is. He closed his notebook. We'll need you to come to the station, give a formal statement. There'll be an investigation. Am I being charged? Not at this time. But this isn't over. The men you engaged last night, they're connected to organized crime. Drug trafficking, illegal hunting, probably other activities. They don't take losses well. I understand. Do you? The sergeant stepped closer, voice dropping. Mrs. Kern, I don't know what you were before you came here, but I know dangerous people when I see them. You're dangerous. So are they. When dangerous people collide, civilians get hurt. I can't have that in my county. Then arrest the poachers. Working on it. Have been for 3 years. But they're smart and they've got resources. Meanwhile, you've just painted a target on yourself. Next time they might come with more men, better weapons, and a willingness to match your level of violence. Let them come. The sergeant studied her for a long moment. You want this fight. I want to be left alone. They're the ones choosing violence. Lady, we both know there's a difference between defending yourself and setting up a battlefield. You're walking a thin line. I'm standing on my property line. Everything I did was legal. The sergeant sighed, tired and frustrated. Come give your statement. We'll document everything. But understand, next time someone dies out here, whether it's them or you, there's going to be questions I can't wave away. Natalie drove to town behind the cruiser. The statement took 3 hours, detailed account of the engagement maps and photos for evidence, explanation of her security setup. She answered every question directly, precisely, without elaboration. By the time they finished, it was dark outside. Chen walked her to her truck. You really think they'll come back? Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on how much they want this territory versus how much they value self-preservation. And if they do come back, then I'll defend my property again. Same as last night. With the same restraint. Natalie opened her truck door. That depends on them, doesn't it? She drove home through darkness, mind turning over the sergeant's warning. He wasn't wrong. She had prepared a battlefield. But not because she wanted war. Because she knew from experience that peace, without the capability to defend it, was just waiting for violence to arrive. The cabin was cold when she returned. She built up the fire, made dinner, sat in her chair watching the wooden star catch firelight. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady, covering the evidence of last night's battle. She wondered if the poachers would take the lesson, if they'd decide her mountain wasn't worth the cost, or if pride and profit would override survival instinct. Either way, she'd be ready. That was the only certainty she could control. 4 days passed without incident. Natalie maintained her routine perimeter checks at dawn and dusk, weapon maintenance, monitoring the security feeds. But the cameras showed only wildlife: deer moving through the valley, a coyote passing along the fence line, an owl hunting from the pine near the creek. No human tracks. No vehicles on the logging road. No thermal signatures at night. The silence felt like breath held. In town, rumors spread. Martha Hendricks heard them at the diner and reported back when Natalie stopped for supplies on December 29th. Word is the Kincaid crew got their asses handed to them by a crazy woman up on Kern Ridge. Is that what they're calling it, Kern Ridge? As of yesterday, apparently. You've got a reputation now. I have privacy. That's all I wanted. Martha poured herself more coffee from the pot on the counter. You know what's interesting? Yesterday, 3 different regular poachers came through town, guys who usually work these mountains. All of them heading south instead. Said the hunting's better down by the state forest. They're leaving the area. Or just avoiding your territory. Either way, the animals around here are breathing easier. Natalie considered this. Reputation could be a defensive asset, fear, maintaining perimeter better than fences. But it also attracted attention, challengers, people who wanted to test their strength against hers. You hear anything about Kincaid himself? She asked. Not directly, but his crew's been quiet. No operations for the last few days. Could be they're licking their wounds. Could be they're planning something bigger. or they've decided to cut their losses. You believe that? No. Martha smiled grimly. Smart woman. That evening, Natalie's satellite messenger chimed again. Another unknown number. You got lucky once. Don't push it. She showed it to the sergeant when he called to update her on the investigation. That's witness intimidation, he said. We can trace the number. It's a burner. They'll have dumped it already. You're probably right, but it confirms they're not done with you. Good to know. Miss Kern, I've been reviewing your background. Your service record is heavily redacted. Most of your deployment history is classified. But I talked to a friend at NCIS, and he painted a picture. You were attached to DEVGRU operations. That means you're not just trained, you're elite level. Natalie said nothing. I'm not asking for details, the sergeant continued. But I need to understand what kind of situation we're facing. Are you going to escalate this? I'm going to defend my property. That's all. With SEAL-level tactics and precision marksmanship. With appropriate response to the threat presented. And if they bring 24 men next time, professional contractors may be ex-military like yourself. Then I'll reassess my defensive posture. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give. I'm not looking for a fight, Sergeant. But I won't run from one either. He sighed, a sound of professional frustration. I've got state police interested now. The equipment you photograph, some of it matches gear from a trafficking ring we've been tracking. If this crew is part of that network, this becomes a federal case. FBI, possibly a TF. You understand what that means. It means you'll have resources to arrest them properly. It also means you need to stand down. Let law enforcement handle it. I will as soon as law enforcement is here to handle it. Until then, I'm on my own. The call ended there. Natalie knew the sergeant meant well, was trying to prevent bloodshed and legal complications. But he didn't understand the reality. Bureaucracy moved slowly, criminal organizations moved fast, and she was the only thing standing between the two. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. Natalie spent it like any other night, watching her perimeter, maintaining equipment, drinking coffee that had long since gone cold. At midnight, she heard distant fireworks from town celebrations echoing through the valley. She raised a silent toast to the wooden star in her window. 6 months ago, she'd never have imagined celebrating the new year armed and alert in a remote cabin. But then 6 months ago, she'd never imagined finding something worth defending with such totality. The property wasn't just land. It was the possibility of peace, hard-won, carefully maintained, worth fighting for. At 130 hours, the security system registered multiple thermal signatures approaching from the northeast. Natalie was moving before conscious thought caught up, grabbing her rifle, checking the scope, transitioning to night operations. But something was different. The signatures were wrong, too large, moving too heavily. She switched to visual camera and saw them 3 elk, a bull, and 2 cows moving across her property toward the valley below. Not a threat, just wildlife reclaiming territory that had become safe again. Natalie lowered her rifle and watched the elk pass. They moved without fear, grazing on winter grass, unaware they were being protected by someone who'd learned that defending the innocent was more important than punishing the guilty. She stayed at her post until dawn. When sunrise finally came spilling gold across the snow, the mountain was silent. No gunfire, no threats, just the clean, cold beauty of winter in the high country. It wouldn't last. Natalie knew that. The poachers would regroup, or new threats would emerge, or the law would decide her defensive measures crossed legal lines. Nothing stayed peaceful forever. But for now on, this first morning of the new year, her mountain was hers. The fence stood strong. The perimeter held. And that wooden star still caught the light, a small reminder that even warriors could choose what they fought for. January brought deep cold and deeper snow. The access road became impassable, except by snowmobile, which suited Natalie fine. She'd stocked supplies for 6 months and had no need to venture into town. But on January 7th, she heard an engine struggling up the mountain. She watched through her scope as a county truck ground through the drift's chains on all 4 tires. The sergeant climbed out along with someone in a Forest Service uniform. Natalie met them halfway down the access road. "Mrs. Kern," the sergeant said. "This is Ranger David Walsh. He needs to speak with you." Walsh was mid-50s, weathered face, the look of someone who'd spent a career in the mountains. "Mrs. Kern, I've been the district ranger here for 12 years. In that time, I've seen these forests stripped by commercial poaching operations. Elk herds decimated. Bear populations declining. But in the last 2 weeks, something changed." "What changed?" "The poaching stopped. Completely. I've got trail cameras throughout the national forest, no activity. The illegal hunting camps we've been monitoring are abandoned. It's like someone flipped a switch. And you think that's because of me? I know it's because of you." Word travels fast in the criminal ecosystem. When ASAAL sniper sets up a defensive position and demonstrates she's willing to use it, people take notice. "I didn't do anything illegal. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to thank you and to ask for your help." Natalie glanced at the sergeant, who nodded. "Hear him out," he said. Walsh continued. "The Forest Service has been trying to protect this region for years. But we're understaffed, underfunded, and these poaching operations are sophisticated. They've got money, weapons, and no conscience. We can't compete. But you changed the equation. You proved these mountains can be defended. What do you want from me?" "Cooperation. Information sharing. If you see poaching activity on your cameras, report it to me directly. I'll coordinate with state and federal authorities. We can build cases, make arrests, shut down the operations permanently. I'm not law enforcement." "No, but you're a force multiplier. Your presence alone is deterring crime across 40 square miles." Natalie considered this. She'd never intended to become a de facto game warden. But the logic was sound. Her defensive posture created ripple effects beyond her property line. "I'll share information," she said finally. "But I won't participate in operations. And I won't testify in court unless absolutely necessary. That's all I'm asking." They shook hands. Walsh left his contact information and a radio frequency for emergency communication. As they drove away, the sergeant leaned out his window. "You did good, Ms. Kern. Don't make me regret saying that." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Natalie monitored her cameras and shared relevant data with Walsh. Poaching activity remained minimal, but she documented 3 separate incidents of trespassing by what appeared to be reconnaissance teams, people testing the boundaries, seeing if her vigilance had waned. It hadn't. Each time she responded the same way: non-lethal warning shots, clear demonstration of defensive capability, documentation for authorities. Each time the trespassers withdrew. By February, something unexpected happened. Hikers and wildlife photographers began requesting permission to access parts of her property adjacent to popular trails. They'd heard the area was protected now and wanted to document the recovering wildlife populations. Natalie granted limited access, establishing specific routes and check-in procedures. She didn't interact with the visitors, but she watched them through her cameras, ensuring they stayed safe and respected the land. One afternoon, a group of hikers reported finding an injured coyote caught in an illegal trap. Natalie extracted the animal, treated its wounds with basic field medicine, and released it 2 days later. The hikers posted about it online, and suddenly the mountain guardian became a folk hero in conservation circles. Natalie found this reputation uncomfortable. She wasn't a hero. She was a woman who wanted privacy and had the skills to maintain it. But she understood how narratives worked, and this one served a purpose. It reinforced the deterrent effect while positioning her as protective rather than aggressive. March brought the first signs of spring. Snow melted from the south-facing slopes. Bears emerged from hibernation. And Natalie began seeing something she hadn't expected: families. A fox family denned near her eastern fence. A pair of hawks nested in the tall pine overlooking the meadow. Elk calves appeared in the valley, wobbly-legged and cautious. The mountain was healing, repopulating, returning to what it had been before commercial exploitation. She found herself watching the animals more than her security feeds, found pleasure in their simple presence, their obliviousness to human conflict. They reminded her that the world contained more than violence and vigilance. One April morning she discovered fresh wildflowers growing beside the cabin. She hadn't planted them. They'd come up on their own, freed by the absence of trampling boots and vehicles. She picked one, a small purple bloom, and placed it in a jar beside the wooden star. It was the first decoration she'd added since Christmas. That evening, a truck approached on the access road, not law enforcement, not Ranger Walsh. A civilian vehicle. Natalie grabbed her rifle by reflex, then recognized the driver. Martha Hendricks. The old woman climbed out carrying a covered dish. Figured you might want some real food instead of whatever freeze-dried nonsense you're eating. How did you get up here? Same way everyone else does. Drove carefully and cursed a lot. Martha held out the dish. Chicken casserole. Still hot. Natalie accepted it, unsure how to respond. Thank you. You planning to invite me in, or are we doing this whole conversation in the cold? Inside the cabin, Martha looked around with frank curiosity. Cleaner than I expected. And you've got that star still up. Thought that was just for Christmas. It serves multiple purposes. I bet it does. Martha sat in the chair Natalie offered. People in town are talking about you. Not bad talk, mostly. They're saying you've cleaned up these mountains single-handedly. I haven't cleaned up anything. I just defended my property. That's what I tell them. But perception matters. And right now the perception is that you're some kind of guardian angel keeping the forests safe from poachers and criminals. I'm not an angel. Didn't say you were. But you're something. And that something is making people feel safer. The hikers, the Forest Service, even some of the old-timers who've seen these mountains decline for decades, they're all grateful. I don't need gratitude. No. But maybe you need to know that what you're doing matters. Not just for you, but for everyone who uses these mountains. Martha stood to leave, then paused. You ever get lonely up here? Natalie considered the question honestly. Sometimes. But loneliness is better than the alternatives I've experienced. Fair enough. But if you ever want company, the kind that doesn't involve gunfire or legal statements, you know where to find me. After Martha left, Natalie ate the casserole. It was delicious, filled with flavors she hadn't tasted in months. She realized she'd been subsisting rather than living, maintaining vigilance at the cost of simple pleasures. That night, she allowed herself to relax her guard slightly, not abandoning her defenses but acknowledging that the immediate crisis had passed. The poachers had been deterred, the mountain was recovering, and she somehow had become part of something larger than her own isolation. She looked at the wooden star and the wildflower beside it. Two symbols representing two parts of who she'd become, the warrior and the guardian, the isolationist and the protector. Maybe she thought it was possible to be both. 3 years later, the fence still stood, but it was weathered now, softened by seasons. The cabin had been expanded slightly, a small porch, a better insulation, solar panels on the roof. Natalie had made improvements not for defense, but for comfort. The property had a name now, Kern Wildlife Preserve. She'd worked with Ranger Walsh and conservation groups to establish it as a private sanctuary open for controlled research and photography, but protected from hunting and development. The legal designation came with tax benefits and federal protection, making it harder for anyone to challenge her stewardship. The poaching had never returned to previous levels. The Kincaid operation had been dismantled through coordinated law enforcement action using evidence from multiple sources, including Natalie's documentation from that Christmas night. The organization's leaders faced federal charges, and the contractors had scattered to other regions. Natalie still maintained her security system, still checked her perimeter, still kept her rifle clean and ready. But increasingly her role had shifted from warrior to warden. She tracked wildlife populations, documented migration patterns, coordinated with researchers studying the ecosystem recovery. She'd learned to balance solitude with connection. Martha visited monthly, bringing food and news from town. Ranger Walsh stopped by quarterly to review conservation data. A few trusted volunteers helped maintain trails and monitor the wildlife cameras. But mostly Natalie was alone. And that was still how she preferred it. On a December evening, Christmas Eve, again 4 years after that first violent night, Natalie stood outside the cabin watching snowfall. The valley was peaceful, blanketed in white, no tracks, except those of animals moving through their territory. The wooden star hung in the window, joined now by other small decorations, accumulated over the years. A pine cone painted gold, a string of simple lights, photographs of the wildlife that had returned to the mountain. She heard footsteps behind her, and turned. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, stood at the edge of the clearing. She wore a winter coat too thin for the weather and looked lost. "Are you the mountain guardian?" the girl asked. Natalie knelt to the child's level. "I'm Natalie. Are you lost? My family's camping down by Miller Creek. I went exploring and got turned around. My dad said if I got lost, look for the cabin on the high ridge. He said the guardian would help. Your dad was right. Come inside. We'll get you warm and call your parents." As they walked to the cabin, the girl looked up at the wooden star. "Is it true you fought off bad guys with just a rifle?" "It's true. I defended my home when people tried to take what wasn't theirs. That's so cool. I want to be like you when I grow up." Natalie felt something shift in her chest. Not pride exactly, but responsibility. This child saw her as a hero, a role model. And maybe that carried obligations beyond defense and isolation. Inside, while hot chocolate warmed on the stove, and the girl's parents were contacted via radio, Natalie talked about the mountain. About the elk and foxes, the hawks and bears, the delicate balance of ecosystems. She talked about responsibility and stewardship, about protecting things not because they belonged to you, but because they deserved protection. So being a guardian isn't about fighting, the girl asked. Fighting is the smallest part. Being a guardian means paying attention, understanding what needs protecting, and being willing to stand between threats and the things you care about. Most days that doesn't involve weapons at all. The girl's parents arrived within an hour, grateful and apologetic. As they prepared to leave, the father shook Natalie's hand. "Thank you. Not just for today, but for everything you've done for these mountains. My family comes here every year because it's safe now. Because you made it safe." After they left, Natalie sat in her chair, looking at the star, thinking about the years that had passed since she'd bought this property. She'd come here seeking isolation, running from a past that had cost her too much. She'd expected to spend her life alone, maintaining defensive perimeters, keeping the world at arm's length. Instead, she'd become what Danny would have called a force for good, not through grand gestures or heroic sacrifice, but through small daily choices, to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than isolate, to defend the vulnerable rather than merely survive. The mountain had given her purpose when she'd lost hers, and in return, she'd given it protection, allowing it to heal and thrive. She thought about that night 4 years ago when armed men had crossed her fence, and she'd chosen restraint over revenge. That choice had set everything else in motion: the reputation, the preservation, the slow transformation from warrior to guardian. She'd been right to hang that wooden star. It had served its tactical purposes, but more importantly, it had reminded her that even in the darkest times, even when preparing for violence, she could still choose what she fought for. Outside, snow continued to fall. The mountain was silent, peaceful, protected. Natalie stood and walked to the window. She touched the wooden star, gently feeling its rough edges, remembering the person who'd carved it years ago during a different deployment, a different life. Then she turned on the string of lights, letting them cast warm colors across the cabin walls. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, perhaps new threats. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, the mountain was safe. And so was she. She poured herself coffee and sat down, not with a rifle across her lap, but with a notebook planning spring improvements to the preserve.